Jodi, CEO and President of the Mortgage Collaborative. I am a recovering lender. You also see me on the SIP on Tuesdays with the Mortgage Collaborative, and I'm a proud mom to 6 four-legged children. But thank you for having us, and thank you to the Reggora team for putting this together and hosting. If you've been in the industry more than 5 years or 5 minutes, you know we don't get a once in a decade appraisal change very often. That's exactly what we're talking about today. The industry is in the middle of transforming from the UAD 2.6 to the UAD 3.6. I hope you all know what that means. It's a complete overhaul of how appraisal data is structured, collected, and delivered to Fannie and Freddie. And this isn't just a form update. It moves from static form-based PDFs to, I remember the days of the appraisal that had the Polaroid pictures stapled to it. So we definitely are making a move past the 3 decades that I've been in the industry. But it's moving from that PDF to a dynamic structured data set built on the MISMO 3.6 standards. And the mandatory deadline is November the 2nd, 2026, and it's closer than most of lending organizations realize. Joining me today are hopefully Lyle Radke and Ken DeFeo from Fannie Mae and Dan English of Reggora. And between the 3 of them, we've got the policy view and the operational and in workflow view, which is exact combination that lenders really need right now. So Dan, quick 60 minutes on who you are and from your vantage point, what this transition means.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, everyone. For those of you who haven't met before, my name is Dan English. I lead the account management team here at Reggora. So, sort of what I'm bringing to this conversation, as Jody mentioned, is really perspective of what actual lenders are doing out there, throughout the ecosystem. I have exposure to close to 300 lenders, ranging from teeny tiny credit unions all the way up to some of the largest lenders in the country. Also, non-QM lenders, just every flavor of lender. Luckily have had exposure to and can kind of talk to how they're facing the 3.6 challenge, where they are, where they maybe should be, and what other folks are doing out there. So look forward to sharing a little bit of that perspective this afternoon.
Awesome. And Ken, we are happy that you were able to make it through the firewall. We will wait for Lyle to break through as well. But while we wait, you want to give us 60 seconds on who you are and from your vantage point, what this transition to UAD 3.6 means?
Yeah, so Ken DeFeo. I've been at Fannie Mae for 7 years. I oversee the UAD project for Fannie Mae with the guidance of many others, but for the most part, I have spearheaded it since I've been here. And I take kind of the primary lead with Freddie Mac on the development of the specifications in the standard.
Awesome. And we're going to start with the why because I want to name something directly. There's real pushback out there. I've seen appraisers and a number of lenders say some versions of this is dumb. Why are we even doing this? Why was the 2.6 not good enough? UAD hasn't been fundamentally redesigned since it was introduced back in 2011. So meaning 15 years of the same static forms, the 1004, the 1073, the 1025, the 2055, while the rest of the mortgage industry has been digitized for them. So Ken, take this for Lyle. What specific problems are there in the current appraisal process that this redesign meant to fix? And what wasn't working with UAD 2.6? And what's the answer to the lenders who think that the change is just for change's sake?
So, about 8 years ago, prior to my actually coming on board to Fannie Mae, we did a lot of surveys, not only to the lenders, but to appraisers and many people in the ecosystem to figure out what were the problems with the appraisal process or the forms as they exist today. The problem with the forms is they were very rigid. So we needed flexibility out of those forms. COVID's a great example of all the nightmare we had to go through to figure out we had to put codes in a map reference field, right? Like it just doesn't work all the time. And the greatest, especially from the lender perspective, the readability. So the big issues were I can't find things. It's too difficult to read these reports. It's not structured. I mean, there are 6 structured pages. After that, it's a free-for-all, depending on the way that an appraiser wants to put the information in. So the biggest reason for doing this is to structure it, make it easier to understand. Maybe that puts a little bit more onus on the appraiser, makes it a hair more difficult for them. But I think ultimately, when they get used to the software, they'll realize this thing's a really good win for everybody. And that really is as big a reason for the movement.
Yeah, yeah. I came through mortgage lending as an underwriter and then up through the chains. And I remember looking at appraisals and thinking, are they trying to hide deferred maintenance just so I can get fired? Because they didn't point it out
Yeah,
clearly.
right. Yeah.
As I was looking through my Polaroid pictures that were stapled to the back. And Dan, from the workflow side, where does the current form-based process create the most friction for lenders and collateral risk teams today?
Just to reiterate, I mean, this is probably an underwriter's worst nightmare when I'm about to show you a redacted appraisal report. So this is obviously the addendum. This is like the king of all, like appraisers just dump. I mean, this is like 5 pages of junk in here. And sometimes I read these addendums and I'm like, wow, there's a really important nugget hidden in this addendum. You wouldn't know it unless you had a magnifying glass and like had time to flip through this. So even Jodi, to your point of like deferred maintenance and things, and it's funny you even brought that up. This wasn't pre-planned. I have this as an example of, an example of some of the more detail that exists in a 3.6 appraisal where, we have both interior and exterior a lot more broken out and broken down so that you can see the components of, in this case here, the exterior features and the condition comments tied to each of those features. So there's just a lot richer data, which speaks to some of the technology problems that people have today underwriting these things. And also, times have just changed over the last 15 years. As example, we now have ADUs. ADUs are a big thing nationwide, especially in California and where I live in Massachusetts. The 1004 just doesn't support ADUs very well. I saw a 3.6 appraisal recently that had a primary property and 2 ADUs, and it handled it pretty nicely, and it was much easier to follow. Another example is like green energy. Solar panels weren't such a big thing 15 years ago, and it just isn't captured very well today. And I think those are some of the biggest problems that 3.6 is attempting to solve. So,
And so for the lenders out there, this is really a trade. So a little short-term adjustment and pain for long-term consistency, transparency, and automation. But let's get into what actually changes. So Ken, walk us through the headline changes, the move from individual forms to a single dynamic.
Yeah. So I'll go back to COVID again, right? So we had to create these new reports, in a sense, a hybrid, a desktop, things that weren't part, the hybrid was, but the desktop was not necessarily part of acceptable appraisals that we would normally take. But because of COVID, we had to adjust. Don't ask us, ask the forms providers how painful that was. And you would think it'd be easy, and it's not easy whatsoever. So there's a lot of work that went into that, and it took a lot of effort. Moving away from forms makes a lot of sense. I think every one of us has seen an order come in for one property type. You do it on that particular form, and then it comes back and goes, I need you to change it to a different form number. That goes away in 3.6. Why do we need form numbers? Why is that really what's important? I think what's important is identifying the legal structure of the property. And in doing that, we get away from form numbers and allow the appraiser to tell us what it is. I mean, if it's a condo, it's a condo. If it's manufactured housing, it's manufactured housing. Can you have a manufactured home in a condo project? You can. Everything's changing. And we needed to make this very scalable so that we can adopt. I mean, we have 2-story manufactured homes now. Wasn't really easy to understand that on the 1004C, right? There's a lot of reasons for movement with this, and it really should make us more nimble. We shouldn't have to wait 15 years to make changes again. The data structure should be in a way that change comes easier, and you're changing it in one place. You're not changing it in multiple places across all the different forms. And it's not just the five forms, it's the five forms times in the condo and you got three other forms for condo and three others with a draw with an exterior or hybrid or desktop, right? So you're changing it across all these things. To unify this and make it a little more simple, I think really moves the needle for everybody and should make it easy. And I think there's things that we've done now within this new data set through the certification language that's actually going to be a benefit to appraisers. Like in the 3.6 world, there's not a requirement that you have to drive the comparables anymore. So that's a big lift, especially rural appraisers that have seen it once. They don't need to drive it again, but felt compelled because of what the CERT language said. So we actually took the opportunity to change things, hopefully make it a little easier on everybody in the industry.
Yeah, and hopefully with the streamlined process, you also have reduced costs. So you're not paying the appraiser to go back and change the form. But
Yeah.
what are the two or three like data level changes that lenders should care about most? So besides the forms number, the things that actually change how a report reads and how risk teams are able to review it.
Well, I think it's identifying what the property is. The form number helped us with that. Going forward, that doesn't exist, right? So you need to look at certain data points. Like you have to look at um, what method was used. So it's either traditional appraisal, hybrid appraisal, desktop appraisal, exterior appraisal. You need to look at the amount of units. If it's more than one, then you know it's a multifamily. You need to also look at, especially now with Fannie Mae anyhow, we have some expanded guidelines on the amount of ADUs you can have. You need to look to the amount of ADUs there are to see, make sure it's eligible. And you also need to understand the construction method. So the
Yeah.
majority of things are site built, but when it says manufactured, well, then that triggers other events that take you down into and give you those other pieces that you get on the 1004MC or 1004C, excuse me, that are relative to manufactured housing. Those are your biggest things. I think everything else is very easy to read and understand, but there are distinct data points once you're looking at it going, well, I have no idea. Why isn't this telling me it's a single family? You need to look at the data to figure out whether it's a condo, a co-op, a condop. A lot of people are going, what's a condop? There's a few of them out there, believe me. But those are the kind of things those are the data points you really need to look at. Those are the things, and um, we've got some documentation out there to help every lender through that to train what to look at to understand what you have.
Yeah, I think one of the most exciting pieces for me was the room level condition rating that is now available. And they're just things that we have today in our homes that 15 years ago we didn't consider. It's the energy efficiency and disaster mitigation reporting. It's alignment of the measurement standards and expanded guidance on leasehold. So I think there's a lot of positive coming through that, and we need to see the brighter side of things in the industry and what that does to push us forward. But Dan, from the technology and workflow side, how does the new delivery format change lenders' system, how the systems actually work and how appraisals are received?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is that now instead of the appraiser or the AMC delivering just an XML and or a PDF, they're delivering a zip file. So that was really the biggest technological change that came across with UAD 3.6. Us as a technology provider and everyone else out there had to come up with ways to ingest the zip file and then kind of unpack it to where you find the XML, the PDF, and then photos, which is something that's new. That's what a lot of companies, including us, had to do from a tech perspective. But from a mapping perspective, there's some nuances. Obviously, I have a sheet here that I'm happy to share with folks that shows what I think are like 750 of the most important new pieces of data that are out there. And most of these are on the subject property and just things that don't exist in 2.6. However, even some of the existing fields in 2.6 were changed in 3.6. So as an example, both borrower name and appraiser name in 2.6 is one field, Dan English. In 3.6, the data set has it broken up into first name, last name. So at least the way that Reggora approached that was, look, we don't want to make the lenders have to change their income LOS or whatever it is settings. So we built in logic to say, look, combine that first name, last name, so that whether you're ordering a 2.6 or a 3.6, it's going to the same field that we might send that data point to in your LOS regardless. So those are a few examples.
Okay. And that you gave some field review, and we do have a question that is in the chat that we're going to get to on the implementation timeline, and maybe we can dig a little more into LOS preparedness when we get to the implementation phase. But Dan, what does this mean for the underwriters and reviewers day to day? Is that a bigger training lift than typical from updates?
Unfortunately, my answer is yes. Um, a lot of underwriters that I speak with day in and day out have kind of been using a checklist for a long time. And unfortunately, after a number of years, your eyes are just trained to kind of go down the checklist and go down to 1004 or 1073.
Yeah.
That's first off, from a policy perspective, the lender needs to kind of decide what are my underwriting standards? Are they changing? Do I need to update my checklist? Am I using checklists anymore? Or am I using a technology provider? So that is one thing. And just, it's new. But I do think that one of the tricky things with the new 3.6 appraisal is that because it is a dynamic form, you do run into a chance where in 2.6, you're used to seeing a blank field and that just jumps out to you. And you say, oh, shoot, the appraiser forgot to fill this out. This is wrong. In 3.6, there's a chance that that field just doesn't appear. And we've noticed that a few times with appraisers who have forgotten to for example, put the AMC name in the report if it was done via an AMC. And instead of seeing a blank client name like 2.6, you just don't see that in 3.6. So that's a change that I think underwriters are really going to have to get used to. I mean, it can be overcome. It's just change. And I do think that that's actually one of the more operationally, I think 3.6 is not a huge deal. I do think from underwriting, it's going to require some more change and thought.
Yeah. But I mean, we're talking about, for 15 years, we've looked at the same types of reports. But even before then, the appraisal report wasn't significantly different in early 2000. So it's muscle memory and being able to, go through a few and review them and get comfortable with them. And, any guidance, I know Fannie and Freddie are putting out guidance and education around that. But I, encourage all of us to collaborate together and share where we're seeing nuances that can help others, and keep that communication open to be able to help each other through the change process. We want to talk about implementation timeline and milestones. So let's get grounded in the dates. And I think that Reggora has a timeline sheet to share. But the industry's treating November 2026 the way they treated some of the past deadlines, as it's distant, and oh, maybe it's going to get delayed, right? Because we're so used in the industry that this is a deadline for this to happen and it doesn't work. So if you can walk us through the timeline, maybe Dan, you want to walk through the timeline, and then I have a question for Ken.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, the November 2nd really is the big date, but I think what's misunderstood by some folks, and I think Fanny has done a good job of really like jumping up and down and screaming this lately, is November 2nd is the submission date. So if you want to approach your worst case scenario with an appraisal, let's say it's going to take 2 weeks. I would really make sure you're speaking internally with your folks to say the deadline is really October 15th. And even that might be kind of scary close, especially if you do business in Maine or, some of these other fun places. Um, Maybe October 1st. So that's why we're kind of doing this webinar now. And like it actually is sooner than November 2nd.
And Ken, when you look at this timeline, and what should lenders be doing right now, this quarter, versus waiting until late summer?
Ordering 3.6 appraisals. That's what they should be doing. Um, I put it this way. We get there's dependencies, and we understand that there's other systems that we rely on. Reggora has got there for them, right? So your client base is in a pretty good place. There are others that don't have that. You need to be, if you haven't looked at every one of your systems to understand if they're functional and can take care of a 3.6 request and bring that information in and make it all run smoothly, you're really putting yourself in a bind at this late stage not to have already determined that. So hopefully you've already done that. Then it's kind of
Yeah.
that internal training, right? The pieces of looking at the appraisal report and figuring out what you have. if those two things are the bigger hurdles, right? But if you're not ordering at this point, well, then you're putting yourself in a bind. It doesn't have to be 100%. Um, but you need to at least be testing, right? Like you should be at the point where you're bringing something into your systems and understanding how they're working and flowing and do the training around those things. And I think if you're there, you're in good shape. If you're not there, then you need to get there probably sooner than later. Otherwise, November 2nd's here. And to that point, Dan's being nice. I think October 15th is putting you in a bind. I'm thinking it's October 1st. If you're not prepared to be 100% orders on October 1st, then it needs to be a really quick follower to that. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself potentially late into the month or some delay with an appraiser and they can't provide you back a 3.6 appraisal report.
Great advice. Don't wait. Stop complaining about rates and down production and get busy ordering 3.6s. One of the questions that is in the chat, and it's similar to the previous, to the previous question, but is the onus on the LOS vendors? Are the LOS vendors prepared? Are the AMCs prepared? What are you seeing? Dan, this is likely you're working with a lot of 300 lenders. I'm guessing they're on different LOSs. Are the LOSs prepared for this? Are the AMCs prepared for this?
We are seeing pretty good LOS readiness. We actually haven't run into any issues with the LOSs because at the end of the day, for them, it's really just a transfer of documents and data, which doesn't change much. I mean, the XML and the PDF are still the XML and the PDF. We are the ones that had to change and figure out how to get it and get it to them. So I think that's not very complex. There have been the two biggest technological changes to me are AMC software readiness, which does vary across AMCs. We've seen some AMCs that are good to go. We're already processing orders through them through the Reggora platform, all set. And we've seen some other ones that are not quite yet ready. And it's not, and that actually is a great distinction, Jodi. We have some AMCs tell our customer, like, we're ready for 3.6, and they might be operationally ready, but their software integration is not ready, unfortunately. And those are two different things. And I would just encourage lenders to make sure they distinguish those two things because that could be different. And then I think not that lenders care about this, but the appraiser form software is another hurdle that I think is continuing to evolve. And I think that's kind of been a challenge more so than like the LOS or some of the other systems out there.
Yeah. And if you're following Ken's advice and ordering 3.6s, I would test ordering with, if you have multiple AMCs, that you're ordering with multiple AMCs. If you're ordering through your LOS, place orders through your LOS with those various AMCs to make sure that they are ready and that they actually can deliver the 3.6 back. It'll be very telling. It's a little bit scary though, because you do have a borrower on the other side. So if they aren't ready, you need to know that very early in the process. And most of the questions that lenders is asking, it feels like most of the industry knows what the deadline is. They know what 3.6 is, but we're a competitive bunch that likes to benchmark ourselves against each other. So the real question is, what is everyone else doing, and am I behind? So Ken, do you want to dive into the lenders who keep asking where they stand relative to their peers? Fannie isn't sharing adoption count. So without the numbers, how would you characterize where the industry actually is right now?
We've seen really nice trajectory in the right direction. More and
That's a
more.
nice way of saying we're still behind, right?
Well, put it this way, I'd love to see everybody at 100% already. That would have been my wish list, right?
Yeah.
But we know that's not feasible and practical. I think can I just tag on to what Dan just talked about a little bit? I think
Absolutely.
I think the difference between readiness is you thinking you're ready and then understanding if you need to do some configuration to systems. Your LOS might say, "Hey, we're ready," but you may need to do a configuration to your own LOS because a lot of them get customized. So just keep that in mind that it's one thing to reach out to them and go, "Hey, can we, if we start 3.6 in a month, are you guys ready?" Yeah, we're ready,
Yeah.
but you may have to do something more than just, have that conversation. So I would be careful with that. We have already seen more, we're 23 days in, and this was as of about 2 days ago, We had already seen a 70% uptick in the amount of lenders that had submitted. Percentages look great, right? Is that the number we want to see? No, I'd rather see a lot more. But the fact of the matter is, it's a nice uptick. It's a substantial uptick, and that's them delivering and testing, right? So at this point, order, test, get it in there. I think
Yep.
you'll feel a lot more comfortable yourself if if you get a couple through the pipes. Figure out
Yep.
if there is a problem, and then start taking it from there to iron out those and give yourself a little bit of time to do it. But we've seen the amount of appraisers doing it increasing substantially, and the amount of and I absolutely will agree with Dan. The appraisal software has been a little bit of the hiccup, right? Like they haven't been there's some it's amazing how many new softwares there are. So if there's any appraisers on here, I know we're creatures of habit. We love what we've done. But I would tell you that the 3.6 model is much different than the 2.6. Most of the 2.6s were kind of the same, and there were all these add-ons that you could put in. But in the 3.6 world, everybody's doing something a little bit different, and it's configured a little differently. Looking at something new is not a bad thing. There are actually, by the time we get probably a few more months down the line, there may be as many as 6 or 7 new software providers out
Yep.
there, in addition to the four staples that we've had in the past. Um, we from all of them, we've received from all of the legacy ones. We have received something into our system from each one at this point. We'd rather see more from some, but we get it. There's still some ironing out of some things. But again, if you don't order the appraisal in 3.6 and the appraiser doesn't start to kind of get on, they're not even going to understand how to do it either. Many of the errors or the issues are, in some cases, they're definitely technology, but in some it's user error. So in order to straighten all of that out, we need everybody kind of doing it. And that kind of starts with the lender, kind of the push down effect, right?
Yep. Yeah, and we've talked about like what are the ramifications, but let's zoom out a little bit and talk about with fully structured data, what becomes possible that simply isn't possible today. So Dan, where you're already seeing lenders and technology partners build on top of this structured data, are you seeing automated reviews? Are you seeing AI assisted QC? Anything concrete happening yet?
Not yet. I mean, there's stuff out there, including Reggora, who's been, improving. We have our own review tool, and obviously, I think the review aspect of this with the more structured data is going to be the biggest benefit to lenders. But to Ken's point, we kind of need more volume out there to kind of see measure the impact of what these things are. I think the potential is great. Even showing that screenshot I showed earlier of like a lot of the deficiencies that can be highlighted, it could potentially really make underwriting easier for these lenders, but I think time will tell with a lot of that stuff. So
And Ken, from where you sit, are with the structured data, what are you seeing as being possible in the future?
Well, if I'll get rid of my Fannie hat, to be honest with you, I'll go back to my lender hat. I would tell you I could automate a lot more because I understand where to go see things. Now,
Yep.
absence of information is still absence of information. If that's, for the lack of a better term, misleading in a sense. If the appraiser doesn't identify a problem, well, no matter what data structure we live in, if they don't identify it, you can't see it unless you see it in the photos potentially. But a good part about a lot of this is we're actually taking images as part of the XML and pulling them separately. So if I'm a lender and I really get into the technology side, I'm looking at those. I'm not only that, I'm taking all of those photos and I'm running AI against those to see if there's actually any problems, defects that weren't actually brought up by the appraiser. And then if they are, you have an excellent way of looking at the data and building better work streams to get the right level of skill set, the right appraisal to the right skill set. I had things in my old days at the bank where certain ones went to analysts and certain ones went to appraisers, but I still had escalation of about 25, 30% from the lower levels up to the higher levels. Well, with this new data structure, I can probably look into those things a little bit more and figure out actually how to get those to the right people at the right time to kind of thin out the process and move things through much faster. So I think there's huge opportunity through technology because it's readable data.
Yeah. And I remember I worked with Reggora at Nationwide Mortgage Bankers, and we were pulling in about 250 pieces of data or data fields off of the appraisal, with our initiative being able to do some of the review through the data through the fields. And so with the changes, I think anybody that is doing that or has significant customization, to your earlier point, Ken, you need to map, you need to be doing your mapping exercises today of making sure that the 3.6 data is going to land in the field that you need it to land in, especially if you've already set up automation, and then start looking at what the possibilities are with the additional data and the structure of the data that is now coming in. But I do think that's a good note to land the discussion portion on. It's not just a compliance deadline, it's the foundation of the next generation of collateral risk. And we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. And John has been reminding people in the chat to ask your questions in question and answer. So one of the contingency is their appraisal software. So a lot of feedback that they aren't ready, aren't working correctly, etc. What is the plan for ensuring that appraisals have reliable software to complete it? So Dan, is the onus now on them to be ready?
I mean, honestly, this is why Reggora created its own form. We are one of the new vendors that Ken mentioned, one of the new, whatever it was, six or whatever, because we have also, I mean, I think the market is the answer. And to Ken's point, just because you've used a software for a long time as an appraiser, this is a new process. Maybe it is time to try a new form software. I think that's kind of the only thing that can be done when it comes to just like supporting the appraisers, and maybe it's just opening their eyes that there might be more out there that can help them.
And you mentioned previously that there were also portfolio and non-QM lenders that are starting to use the 3.6. So if you aren't selling to the GSEs, is there any reason to move to the 3.6 on the similar timeline, or do you chance it?
I think so much of that depends on your investor. So what I've been encouraging our customers to do is talk to your investors, because at the end of the day, that's what matters. Unfortunately, we've even seen this with the adoption of PDRs and PDCs, or now value acceptance plus data collection. There are unfortunately even aggregators and investors who don't accept those, and they've been around for a long time. So it is a nuanced conversation, and it just kind of depends on where the loan is going.
And I think it would be really difficult if you're doing agency loans too, and not just strictly non-QM, to be looking at and to try to get your LOS to accommodate both. You're going to lose a lot of efficiencies.
But I mean, just to be open in this, the fear FHA, that's where we are right now with FHA, right? So that is something that we need to continue to ask about and talk about, because FHA is not, at least as of today, on the same timeline. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And
We
Ken,
have
I'm gonna.
received we have
Oh,
received
go
an
ahead.
FHA appraisal through UCDP, so
hmm, but
so
not through
it's they're
EAD.
they're piloting, but they're getting there. Now again, will they be November 2nd? That's up for them to say, but we have seen one.
Yeah.
It came through fine, it scored, it did everything it needed to do in our internal systems as well, which so that's actually really good news. And I
Yeah.
think again, as long as they have the ability to accept them, it doesn't, the mandate's kind of irrelevant, right? If you're
Yeah.
moving to this point where the majority of your loans come to the GSEs in the first place and a portion goes to FHA, well, if you're ordering them all in 3.6 and they have the ability to adjust them anyhow, then keep on rolling, right? Like they're not going to say no to them. Think
Yeah,
of it in terms of that, right?
that's honestly great to hear. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Ken, the UAD 3.6, like when you're thinking about, you're saying it is able to accommodate updates that 2.6 wasn't able to update. Have there been like internal discussions and thought process on how you will be able to pivot and manage updates into the future?
Yeah, we have a laundry list of things we're already looking to figure out how to do better. this was complicated. I know we'll get picked on for the long journey, and I can't believe it took you so long, and it's really not that great, and all of this. But I got to tell you, when you're trying to build something to be universal across the country and figure out
Yep.
all the nuances in certain markets, it's just not an easy task.
Yeah.
We had some blind spots. We have things that we're going to enhance, but we want to do that after mandate. So there's things that we're looking at. We'll work directly with uh, the software vendors to make it better. I mean,
Yep.
there's even things that we put into the data set that we decided about 4 years ago. Are they in the 4 year time period since then? They became actually less relevant, and that's the thing that's gonna and something actually may reverse that. There may be
Yeah.
something we didn't even know about that actually is relevant moving forward, right? So this allows us that ability to stay current. The hope is maybe the cycles are every couple of years where there's updates so that we can do things better, add to the enumerated fields. Um,
Yep.
you know, take away maybe something, add something. I mean, we need to be, if you really want to make it digital, you got to be able to move a little quicker. And we really were
Yep.
not able to do that in the 2.6 world.
Yep. So a clarifying question came in is will the form numbers be the same? It actually, there won't be form numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ken. There won't be form numbers. It will be a report
Yep.
and a report for all types, correct?
Yeah, I'll pick on Dan. He keeps saying form. It's not a form.
Yeah,
That's
I
the new
know.
4 letter. That's the new 4 letter word out there,
Get
right?
kicked out of the
Form.
webinar.
Yeah, it's one report structure for all. Like I said, you need to look at the data points to understand what the equivalency was in an old form type. I mean, remember the numbers represented a property type. And then there was extensions off of that that represented the type of appraisal it was. So the 1004 had a 1004, and then there was a 1004 hybrid and a 1004 desktop, and then there was a 2055, which meant exterior only, right? All of those things were form numbers, but they're relative to the property type first and foremost. The data will tell you whether it was a single family or whether it was a hybrid or a traditional appraisal or an exterior only or whatever. So that's why understanding kind of the data points is a big deal. But every one of those data points you need to know sits right on that summary page. That is a great opportunity for somebody to get a really good glance right off the bat in one page as to what's going on with that property. And it'll be significant, I think, to moving us forward because if everything just works, it's a traditional and and there's no conditions, there's no conditions to the report. This gives you a great summary or actionable items list. So, like if I say it's a condo and you need to go get a condo writer, you know that out of the gate directly. If it's a co-op, you'll know that. And if it's in a PUD, you need a PUD writer. Those are distinct data points that which are for the most part relative to form numbers in a sense, right? So there's way of still getting there. The form numbers are just gone.
And Jody, I have this pulled up because we've been, one of the probably biggest operational changes that really isn't that difficult. It's just a one-time change and getting used to it, like me getting used to not saying the word form, is we are going to have to rename all of your products because today you have a 1004, a 1073, a 1025 in your users, unless you use automatic ordering. When they go into the ordering screen on whatever system you use, you're clicking the 1004 button. Well, now you need to make sure that your folks are used to looking for we're kind of going with a standard product naming convention of 3.6 conventional, one unit traditional. And to Ken's point of there being data points, we can read data points from the loan origination system to say, is this an investment property? We'll then suggest a 3.6 conventional, one unit traditional with rental. So we have this pre-built for lenders. It's relatively easy transition for us to kind of get people going with this. And the beauty of it is it's honestly, we think more standardized. So
So if you aren't already on automatic ordering through Reggora, you should be, because then you don't have to look through the different names and try to pick the right one. They'll simply pick up the data points and automatically order the appraisal for you. Have either of you seen with those lenders that are completing the 3.6, have you seen improved turn times or decreased fees? Or I should say increased fees, change in fees?
I mean, I'll steer clear of fees. That has nothing to do with the
Okay.
GSEs. What I can tell you that the majority of the issues or the corrections that go back are not the typical corrections we've seen for so many years. The ability to read the reports significantly improved. Those are not what's going back to the appraiser. What might be going back, and we just published a document called Lessons Learned. So what we've seen is, especially in the sales grid, because it's far more robust. The goal in the new sales grid was, today you get a condition and quality rating, but you got to go read somewhere in an
Yeah.
addendum to figure out why there may or may not have been an adjustment, and they give you this history. The way that the new grid is designed is to bring in elements to actually speak to that, whether you have a better kitchen or a worse kitchen, subject or comp, right? Those things are right there. So as you logically go down through the grid, you should be able to see that and understand it substantially easier. This is a big lift to the underwriter because today you get it in a PDF and you're scrolling and you're moving back and forth, and you got to go to photos and then back to commentary and keep on rolling back and forth. This eliminates all of that. And ultimately, I think once you get used to it a little, get used to it, it's going to really improve, the ability to understand how an appraiser got to their final conclusion. And I think that's truly the biggest benefit to all of this. But the things that we're seeing in the grid is they're taking items and put them in the wrong sections. So the whole three blank line thing that we see today, like that's where you put a pool and a spa. Well, pool and a spa sits in an amenity today. It doesn't
Yep.
sit, it actually has a home. But I think what appraisers do, because the grid's so big, that the first time they get these, what we're calling blank lines, they go and throw a pool in there and make an adjustment for it. Well, it's either sitting in the general information, or they're putting it in the unit interior information, or they're putting it at the exterior. Learning the data structure is a big deal. And that's what I would implore all appraisers to understand is go look at Appendix C and some of the other information out there and actually understand what goes where. Look at the data structure to understand it. And I think if they get to that, then I think they're going to be in a really good place.
And then, so Dan, same question to you. Have you seen any difference in turn times and fees with the
Yeah.
3.6?
It's still kind of too soon to tell. Honestly, in the first ones, we have turn times have been kind of normal. We have seen a relatively high occurrence of appraisers either turning down the offer to do the report or coming back and saying, I want more money. That has been very frequent. What I tell lenders, my recommendation is to the whole point of this webinars like just do one. I still really
Yeah.
strongly believe in that. It's a very low bar to order one. I think
Yeah.
you'll surprise yourself when you do and you're like, oh, that was easy. But pay attention to that first one and have the internal discussion with yourself and your team. Okay, if an appraiser comes back and says, I want $100 more for this, what's the path? Do I take it? Can I pass it off to the borrower? Probably not if you didn't disclose it. Do I just pay for that from the lender and kind of eat that as a training expense in some ways? Or do I tell my appraisal desk or my AMC, look, try to get it allocated for 24 hours at the existing fee, and if not, flip it to a 2.6 and then we'll pick another one for a 3.6. I think that just like staying on top of it and having that conversation beforehand with what the plan is, if, and it's not every time, but if you run into an increased fee, what do you do? I think kind of goes a long way.
Yeah. And that's a wrap. So for everyone on the line, TMC is tracking this transition, and we have close relationships with the agencies and are in communication. So anything that you're seeing will also be helping provide education from both to our lender members, but we do still have more than 20 questions that are in the chat. So Reggora will be answering those and likely having a follow-up webinar to be able to address those additional questions. So we thank the listeners for your participation and your curiosity. And thank you to Dan and Ken for your expertise today. It's much appreciated, and to Reggora for hosting today's session that helps move our industry forward. So thank you again.